Section 24 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by ShrimpPhish. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The Conscience. The conscience as a motive power with emotions. All men take this view of conscience. Some, such as Thomas Brown, make it a mere class of emotions overlooking the ideas in all emotions. Some of the highest feelings of our nature are called forth by great and good actions, by charity, by compassion, by long-suffering, by courage, by sacrifice, by heroism. Some of the most terrible of feelings are stirred up by criminality in thought or act. The emotion arises according to the idea that gives rise to it. Candid, honest conduct pursued habitually from day to day generates self-approving feelings, which may have nothing of self-righteousness in them. He who stands up manfully to oppose the wrong feels himself braced by the act. He who cherishes a constant kindness has as much enjoyment in his deeds as the recipient of his kindness can possibly have. High thoughts tend to enlarge and elevate the mind. A generous deed performed diffuses a glow through the breast of the doer. Prayer, as it ascends to heaven, tends to carry up the soul thither. On the other hand, the deepest feelings may be called forth by sin. Low and debasing thoughts produce a constant dissatisfaction. Every dishonesty tends to produce reproaches. The cheat lives under a constant fear of being detected. Every act of violence is liable to be followed by a regurgitation of temper. Habitual transgression genders perpetual remorse. It is often felt that the blood of murder can never be washed out. End of section 24.
Section 25 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. Section 25. Chapter 4. What the Conscious Reveals. Preliminary. It is a perceiving power. It notices in certain voluntary acts a moral quality as clearly as the eye observes colours in body, and as the consciousness discovers thinking and feeling in the mind. We perceive the quality first in ourselves, and then in others. On reflecting on this deed of cowardice into which we fell, we pronounce it to be mean, and on that act of charity we declare it to be noble. We are sure that there is excellence in this daughter, devoting herself to promote the comfort of her aged mother. We condemn the son who neglects the father, so kind to him in his younger years. We are as certain that there is duty in the resolution to resist evil, as there is solidity in that lead and gold. 1. There is obligation implied in those acts which are perceived to be good or evil. When I simply view that coin or that sword, this brilliant intellectual feat, or that artistic taste, I believe in the existence of the things, and may be constrained to admire them. But I have no conviction that there is any duty devolving on me in consequence. But when the moral power looks at and discovers that this coin would relieve a person in poverty, that this sword might defend an innocent man from danger, a conviction arises that I have something to do with them, and that I ought to use them to promote these good ends. in the very perception of a morally good proposal, there is implied in it as an essential element that it is illegible, that there is a duty and there is an obligation to attend to it. On the other side, when a temptation to evil is laid before us, say to tell a lie or indulge in forbidden pleasures, there is an obligation laid on us to resist it. And if we neglect to do so, we feel that we have done wrong and deserve punishment. The following seems to be a correct account of the requirements which the conscience makes and the judgments it pronounces. 1. It authoritatively demands that certain actions be done. 2. That certain actions be not done. 3. It declares that the performance of the first class is commendable, approvable, rewardable, and 4. That the omission of the first or commission of the second is wrong, condemnable, punishable. It thus appears that the conscience claims authority and demands obedience. It has its precepts and prohibitions. It should be noticed that the conscience proclaims not only the first and second, but the third and fourth of the judgments above enumerated. It declares that the omission of duty or the commission of sin is to be avoided. Hence the sense of guilt and the fear of impending judgments which sin brings with it sooner or later. This feeling of reproach as to the past and of apprehension as to the future is one of the characteristics of our nature, and he who overlooks it is losing sight of one of the striking properties of humanity. 2. The idea of law is involved in conscience. In this respect, the conscience is different from all the other powers, such as the memory, imagination, or reasoning. These, no doubt, do in a sense take the form of a law, inasmuch as they have a prescribed rule and act in a regular manner. For instance, association of ideas follows the laws of contiguity and correlation. But it is in a different and higher sense that the moral power in man implies a law. It points to a law above itself, which it is bound to obey. Nay, it takes to itself the form of a law. Quote, "They who have no law, no written law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts." End quote. Rom 2:15. It is a law not in the same sense as gravitation is a law, chemical affinity, or the law or resemblance in association of ideas, but as the edicts of a government, the commands of a father, of a master, or of God. There is something enjoined, required. The idea of this law, unchangeable and eternal, reaching over all intelligences, is one of the highest which the mind of the man can attain. It involves right, title, claim. It implies obedience and disobedience, merit and demerit, and genders the idea of reward and punishment as beyond mere happiness and misery, and as it is in fact deserved happiness and misery. The idea of law seems, by a single logical step, to carry with it the idea of a lawgiver. Kant seems altogether right when he maintains that the law, which he describes truly and felicitously as the categorical imperative, justifies as a corollary the being of God, as a moral governor being always accompanied by the perception of God as governor. The conscience announces that we are responsible to him. Quote, "So then every one must give account of himself to God." End quote. But if we are to render an account, there must be a day of reckoning in this life or the life to come. He who hath appointed the law so authoritatively, and proclaimed it so emphatically, must needs inquire whether it has or has not been obeyed. In other words, must be a judge. But this work is not fully discharged in this present state of things, and therefore we look for another. There are times, indeed, when God seems to set up a judgment on earth, and calls men before it. There are examples ever and anon of studiously concealed wickedness being brought to light and exposed, of the arm of violence being arrested when the blow was about to descend, and of the deceitful man being caught in the net which he laid for others. These cases, however, are not uniform, nor are they without palpable exceptions. They are confirmations of our moral decisions, but they do not come fully up to their demands, which insist that what is partial here be at last universal. Our moral nature, giving these intimations to the world at large, seems to carry a special message to every man that he must appear before the judge. To the great body of mankind, the conscience is the monitor, which tells them of the world to come. 3. The conscience gives the idea and sense of sin. It gives these as clearly as the idea and sense of moral good. It approves of the good, but it also disapproves of the evil. It as certainly forbids the one as it commands the other. The law which commends the duty condemns the disobedience of it. Putting and presenting the question, but not answering it. How are we to be delivered from it? I cannot close this paragraph without remarking how strange it is that our high academic moralists, as Chalmers used to call them, should discourse so eloquently about the beauty of moral excellence without ever calling attention to the fact that man falls so far beneath it. 4. The conscience is not merely coordinate with the other powers. It is above them as an arbiter and a judge. It would through the will guide, restrain, and control the memory, imagination, judgment, and all other powers, proclaiming that it is superior to them and has authority over them, and deciding when they are to be curbed, and when they are to be allowed full operation. It tells the memory when it should bring up the past, the imagination when it should be forbidden to enter malignant or unchaste regions, and the judgment that it should look at the whole facts before it comes to a decision. This is the great truth established by Bishop Butler, and constitutes the one excellence of English ethics. 5. It looks to acts of the will and decides upon them. This it does directly, and then through them it has influence on all our actions, in the mind and beyond it. In fact, it is the practical reason by its motive power enlivened by feeling, prompting, curbing, as the rider does his horse, the habitual acts of the man and forming his character. But the will which thus falls under the conscience has a very wide jurisdiction, embracing more than is commonly allotted to. Its essence is choice, and there is will of which the conscience judges in every act in which there is choice. whatever it be that it is in a man's power either to accept or reject, either to do or not do, is within the province of the will. It embraces not only volition or the determination to act, but with concupiscence, attention, preference, all the volitional acts that sway the other exercises of the mind. All this will be unfolded when we come to speak of the will as a department of the mind. End of section 25. Section 26 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. Section 26. Chapter 5. The Conscience in Actual Exercise. The office of the conscience is to show us what is good and what is evil, just as it is the design of the intellect to show us what is real and what is not real, what is true and what is false. Let us look at the forms which it takes and the way in which it works in the human heart. It is ever performing its functions in one way or other, but often in a very unsatisfactory manner, silent when it should speak, and speaking when it might be silent, mistaking the character of an action, and declaring good to be evil and evil good. Let us view it in its corrupt and in its rectified forms. In illustrating this subject, it is of importance to bear in mind that when we speak of the conscience doing this and that, we are not so to personify it as to make it a living agent like the soul itself. The conscience is nothing else than the mind directed to a particular class of objects, to voluntary acts, and in all its acts other powers of the mind may join with it. First, there may be a slumbering conscience. It does not perceive or feel the obligation of the good to which it should prompt us, and it does not discover the evil against which it should warn us. It is set as a watchdog and does not sound the alarm. There can be a reason given for all this. It is somnolent and does not wish to be disturbed. It says, quote, "A little more than sleep, a little more than slumber, a little more folding of the hands in sleep." End quote. The man does not wish to do that which is good. It requires such labour and self-sacrifice. He would rather not hear of it. He would rather not know of that poor relative or neighbour or dependent whom he might aid in difficulty. The thought of his omissions and commissions does not gratify his pride, and he would rather not be troubled with them. Persons of this temper may pass through life with a wonderful amount of contentment and self-complacency, practicing the ordinary virtues of their family, or social or business circle, but with little or no reproach as to the neglect of higher duties. Feeling, if not saying, "We have not been cruel to our household or dishonest in our business. We have not been thieves or murderers, and so we are good." Second, an accusing conscience. This is apt to be felt, in the first instance, in slight restraints, as slight as the checks by which the rider guides his steed. But there is a more decisive struggle when the man is evidently bent on going out of his course, and the conscience has to issue its order, and when it is disobeyed it has to whip and lash. The feeling is, quote, "I should not have done this," end quote. It is one of regret and compunction, all arising from an accusation or charge being made. The effect of this warning is to startle and alarm, and if this is properly attended to, it may lead to repentance as now required by the conscience, and a resolution to avoid the deed for the future. But frequently, the issue is different. Third, there is an excusing conscience. In this we have not only the moral sense, but the heart or will raising up exculpatory thoughts. So the Apostle, Rom 2:15, says, giving up the whole complex powers. 1. That there is a law written in the heart. 2. That the conscience comes in with its joint witness. And 3. That the thoughts accuse or charge or else excuse. To avoid the accusing, the excusing begins and stirs up a nest of thoughts, which would, by their contentions, distract the attention and ward off the blow. These internal discussions may take a variety of shapes. First, an attempt may be made to overlook the deed, to drown the still small voice by louder noise, say, the bustle of business or the din of folly. But if this be impossible, if there has been manifest evil done, pain inflicted, chidings on the part of those we esteem or love, then these terrible assaults like the strong wind and the internal struggles like the earthquake, and the convictions burning like the fire, will so arouse the soul that it must attend to the voice which, if not so loud, is more penetrating than all its precursors, asking, "What hast thou done?" The effort will now be to palliate the offence, to plead extenuating circumstances, to set some supposed good done over against the sin. Generally to cover the evil out of sight, to bury it beneath a load of earth. This can be accomplished by the thoughts, the more easily and effectively, because the evil deed may have been of a concrete or complex character and may be viewed under favourable aspects. This deceitful speech was to cover a friend. This profane word was to express our sense of ill usage. This rude word to rebuke an improper deed. This lust had love in it. This covetousness proposed to gain wealth for a good end. The thoughts in their natural action will thus construct a covering, which may become as hard and impenetrable as that of the shellfish. The accusing will thus lead to excusing, the charge to the defence. Many seem to live all their days in this intermediate, disputed country, flitting from the one to the other, ever driven back from the reproach to the excuse, and the excuse allowing some new offence with its charge. Surely this is an unhappy position, exposed to attacks on both sides. Yet it is that of the great body of mankind, quote, the thoughts meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another, end quote. Out of this may come, fourth, a perverted conscience. In consequence of these conflicting thoughts, of these accusations and excuses, the conscience may become confused, uncertain in its decisions, and ever falling into error. In consequence of viewing things obliquely, the eye has got out of its proper place and can see nothing correctly. It may call that which is good evil, and that which is evil good. Thus Paul could claim that he acted conscientiously, and yet he thought with himself that, quote, he ought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. End quote. And so he breathed out threatenings and slaughter and, quote, made havoc of the church, entering into every house and hailing men and women, committing them to prison. End quote. The bitterest persecutors, religious and anti-religious, the inquisitors of Spain, and the bloody fanatics of the French Revolution, have in many cases been conscientious but with a terribly perverted conscience, looking to a very different law than that to which it should ever look, the royal law of love. I have noticed that those who have been trained in secret societies, collegiate or political, and in trades unions, that priests, Jesuits, thugs, Molly Maguires, have their sense of right and wrong so perverted that in the interests of the body with which they have identified themselves, they will commit the most atrocious crimes, not only without compunction, but with an approving heart and with the plaudits of their associates. By such training and binding connections, the conscience has got a twist and has become crooked, and cannot be made straight by any human means. The same thing is seen in the excuses and defences proffered by tradesmen, by business and professional men, for the trickeries commonly practised. In all these cases, some good end is contemplated by the mind and approved of by the conscience, the promotion of a great cause of the Church, or of a noble brotherhood of men, or of a high profession, or of the individual's own well-being, and other aspects of the deed are kept studiously out of view. Fifth, a troubled conscience. This arises when there is a warfare without either side gaining the victory. It may have been with a severe conflict, in which there has been a terrible charge on the part of the accuser, and a stout defence on the part of the excuser, ending in a drawn battle in which the opposing parties are left frowning on each other. It is apt to be continued in a guerrilla war with daily offences and daily defences. The soul, which is the scene of such conflicts, becomes wasted and sterile, and produces no such fruit as it ought. Sometimes, especially after the commission of a great offence, say a fit of drunkenness, this troubling becomes a fever with a high pulse, a constant restlessness and sleeplessness and struggle, which waste and do not strengthen. At these times, the sins come back into the recollection, as it were with a detective glaring and reproachful eyes. As they do so, they stir up a succession of feelings, accusations, compunctions, regrets as to the past, and fears as to the future, which chase each other as wave does wave in an agitated ocean, but with constant crossings and crestings and foam. Sixth, a blunted conscience. This is apt to be the enduring issue of a long contest with it, the heart being exasperated, and this being intolerable, quote, a wounded spirit who can bear, end quote. A strong determination is formed to characterize it, and it is, quote, seared as with a red-hot iron, end quote. It now loses all sensibility of touch and quickness of perception. The man does evil without knowing it, and when he feels the reproach coming in, he has an opiate to soothe it. So after having 1 or 2 falls rough as a cataract, the stream of life passes sluggishly on to its termination in swamps and mud. 7th, a pacified conscience. At this point, one of the most difficult of all questions in ethics is started. How, when sin has been committed, is the conscience to be pacified? The conscience will insist, first, that there be repentance. Secondly, that there be confession when a party has been offended. Thirdly, that there be reformation. And fourthly, reparation where injury has been done. But is this enough? First, there is the difficulty of getting penitence and a change of conduct. For there is a strong disposition to continue in the sin and to justify it. Then it is often impossible to make reparation of any kind to the person injured. He may be beyond our reach, may, for instance, be dead, or the evil inflicted may have been moral. The person has been tempted to sin, and the sin is working its effects, which the tempter is not able to counteract. But on the supposition that all this has been done, the question still presses itself. Is this sufficient? The natural conscience seems to say that it is not. For after committing a flagrant act, men have commonly been led by native impulse to look round for an expiation of some kind, to propose to give an offering, or perform a laborious service, or practice a painful abnegation. But after they have made the sacrifice, it does not follow that the conscience is appeased. On the contrary, after the most excruciating tortures have been submitted to, it seems still to frown like Sinai's top, and to leave its sentence upon us. People may say that in all this the conscience is perverted, and has become the slave of superstition. But let those who advance this objection tell us plainly when the conscience should be satisfied, and let us know what they, following the law of conscience, would say to the liar, the perjurer, the drunkard, the adulterer, the murderer. This is a question which the ethical philosopher is bound to attempt to answer. As he does so, he may find and be obliged to acknowledge that he cannot give a reply satisfactory to reason, satisfactory to himself, and he may gather valuable lessons from his felt inability. The law requires love and obedience. The conscience, when the act is fairly presented to it, will condemn all selfish and malignant feeling and all disobedience. But that law is evidently broken. What is to be done now? To repent may be the reply. That repentance is the present duty, and that the conscience demands it, is admitted by all. But that past sin, is there any provision in that law which requires it to admit present repentance even when genuine as an atonement for past transgression? The sin as a violation of God's law remains, and the conscience seems to be clamouring for some expiation, and yet cannot, or at least does not, say what it would accept. In this state of uncertainty and fear, all manner of expedients are resorted to, if possible, to allay the chidings of the accuser. First, Gifts may be offered as a bribe to the god whose law has been broken. But these being of doubtful efficacy, privations and pains are resorted to appease offended powers and turn away wrath. Pilgrimages are undertaken. Enjoyments in meats and drinks and meetings for mirth are denied. Stripes and other lacerations are inflicted, and fathers and mothers give the fruit of the body for the sin of the soul. Then whole holocausts of men, women, and children have been offered to enraged demons when nations are afraid of impending judgments. To this point, conscience and natural ethics founded on it carry us, and here they leave us in a land of shadows, doubts, and difficulties. It is when we are thus wandering that the religion of Christ meets us, and tells us of a righteousness which fulfills the law, and of a suffering and death to make atonement. If these were offered by any other, the thought might start difficulties. But being presented by God, the lawgiver, governor, and judge, the doubts all disappear, and the conscience is satisfied in union with Him who delivers us from the power and dominion of sin. Millions have rejoiced in the glad tidings thus brought them. Surely all should feel grateful if they can hear of a way by which they may be delivered from the burden of past sin, to start on a life of new obedience. 8th, a purified conscience. In order to do this, it is necessary that the conscience be first pacified, for without this, it would still accuse, and there would be chafing and rebellion. But the inward monitor being trusted, there is peace and a preparation for purity. The moral sense being quickened discovers the evil at once, and shrinks from it. Having its vision purified, it perceives the good, approves and appreciates it, and acknowledges the obligation to attend to it. The conscience, always looking to the law, may become the regulator of life, and may come to rule easily as well as effectively, for it has met and conquered opposition. Sinful pleasure ceases to be a temptation. It has lost its attractions. Habits and tendencies, the results of habits and new affections, will concur to lead the man in the right way. It is thus that we are sure of certain men that they will not do a mean or dishonourable or malignant or profane act, and we can trust their word and confide in their acts. They may come to be and to do good naturally. That is, all the dispositions of their new nature tend in this way. 9th, an approving conscience. This may take the form of a self-righteous spirit, offensive to God and most unbecoming on the part of one who has done evil. The truly good man is kept from this by a sense of demerit, and that humility which is one of the foundation stones of his excellence. With his accompaniment, self-approval may be an allowable, nay, a commendable frame of mind, and may exercise a sustaining, a cheering, and an elevating influence. Every right-minded man will be afraid to lose the approval of his conscience, for then he has nothing to fall back upon in the hour of trial, when foes attack and friends forsake him. It is one of the main encouragements to a spirit of independence. The labouring man is borne up by it when he goes through his daily toil, determined to flatter no one, and to owe no man anything. Quote, "And looks the whole world is the face, for he owes not any man." End quote. It is proverbial that an evil conscience makes a man a coward, for he does not know when someone may charge him with his sin, which he must either confess to his humiliation or deny with a lie, and he feels that he has no inward strength to fall back upon. On the other hand, a good conscience gives a man courage to resist the evil when it is coming in like a flood, and to stand by a good cause when friends, companions, the whole world may be against him. It is especially comforting and sustaining when a man is falsely accused and multitudes are believing the charge. It has in thousands of cases strengthened the martyr to die not only in patience, but in triumph. End of section 26. Section 27 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. Section 27. Chapter 6. Development and Growth of the Conscience. The vital, the burning, philosophical question of the present day relates to the development of the conscience. It divides itself into two. Is the conscience developed? If it be so, does this interfere with its authority? 1. Is the conscience developed? If so, out of what? Out of the original elements, whatever they be, of which matter is composed. Out of atoms or molecules, or out of centres of mechanical power, or out of monads, of Leibniz. There is really no evidence of any of these being able to produce conscience. I suppose it may be assumed that a cause cannot communicate what it has not. There is no proof that a pound weight can balance 100 pounds, that a mechanical impulse can produce life, that a mass of matter, say of clay or ice, or gold, can produce a thought or a sentiment. I presume there is no moral power in the original atom or molecule or force centre, and I do not see how it ever can give what it has not itself got. They tell us that it comes in somehow. They cannot tell how, by the combination of the original powers, and goes down by heredity. It may be allowed that heredity might hand it down if it once had it. But if it has not got it, it cannot transmit it. Observation gives us no instance of a combination of material particles being able to produce the judgment and the sentiment which discerns between good and evil, which tells us that it is wrong to tell a lie. On the other hand, it may be allowed that if once we had a germ of moral perception and discernment, it might be propagated. Nobody imagines that material particles could spring up of themselves, but, being created, they can work in certain ways by the powers they possess. Darwin demands 3 or 4 germs created by God before he can account for the development of animals. We continually observe a weak infant bodily and intellectually growing up into a strong man. So, if we once had conscience as a germ, we might conceive it growing and expanding. 2. Supposing that there is development in conscience, the question arises, is its authority, and in particular its supremacy, thereby dethroned? Ancients and moderns have been in the way of appealing to its decisions as infallible. It is now urged that it is the product of circumstances, and that its decisions are different in different positions. As to whether development interferes with the authority of conscience, this depends on the nature of the development. If the evolution is fortuitous or fatal, we might not be entitled to argue that the product carries with it any weight. Thus, circumstances generate prepositions and prejudices, the prejudices of individuals and classes, of soldiers, of tradesmen, of lawyers, which, so far from being justifiable, are to be condemned. So it might be with a conscience developed out of positions and occurrences. Hereditary beliefs, so far from being always right, are often wicked and degrading. Such are the superstitions of the heathen and family, tribal and national hatreds. There are cases in which conscience seems to sanction weak and injurious customs, such as the abstaining from foods which are nutritious and requires us to make harsh and unreasonable services in the lacerating of the body, or in carrying on destructive wars against nations and creeds. But there are cases in which there may be development and yet authority. We must here presuppose that the conscience does now claim authority. It declares that we ought to love God and love our neighbour. This sense of ought and obligation may have been handed down from one generation to another. This fact surely cannot render its claims invalid. It is acknowledged by Professor Huxley that development does not interfere with the argument from design in favour of the existence of God. Herbert Spencer shows that development in the geological ages makes for happiness by increasing the field of enjoyment as living creatures rise in the scale. And this certainly looks as if it were the act of a benevolent being. It can be shown that the evolution we have in nature contains evidence of adaptation of one thing to another, of purpose and ends in the promotion of the comforts of the animal. Sooner or later there will be a work written after the manner of Paley, exhibiting instances of teleology in the way in which the various organs of the body have been formed and made to fit into each other. All this proves that evolution is a law or work of God, quite as much so as gravitation or chemical affinity or vital assimilation is. Suppose, then, that, as the result of development, we have a conscience which points to a moral law, which is of the nature of a categorical imperative, enjoining this and forbidding that, and pointing to a God guaranteeing the whole. We must regard this law as authoritative and carrying with it the sanction of God. It is admitted, on the supposition that individual men were created by God with the law in their hearts, that this law has claims upon our obedience. But its claims are not annulled when it is shown that conscience is the result of a long process, all under the control of God, and evidently tending towards the production not only of happiness, but of morality. Put the further supposition that there has been in the development a germ of some kind there at the beginning, or superimposed at a certain stage. We have now an hypothesis worthy of consideration, and in no way interfering with the divine authority of the moral power. That power has been there all along, and comes forth into action in certain circumstances, and is liable to be modified, to be strengthened or weakened by the surroundings. Regarding God as producing the original germ, guiding and guarding the evolution of it, we may regard the conscience as the vicegerent of God, and speaking to us in the name of our governor and judge. The question of the validity of the moral power is quite analogous to that of the validity of the intellectual power. It is quite certain, I think, that there is an evolution and a growth of intelligence. But this does not lead us to set aside or distrust our intelligence. The intelligence is a cognitive power, and it perceives things without and within us. It grows with our growth, and ever reveals more truth. The man knows more than the child, and the savant, the philosopher, and the theologian knows more than the uneducated man. This circumstance does not lead us to doubt of our understanding. Just as little should the growth of the moral power in man lead us to doubt of its authority. The two are on the same footing. If the one is to be trusted in its own field, that is, in determining what is true and what is false, so is the other to be trusted in discerning between good and evil. If the power of knowing the good is to be set aside, we must be prepared on the same ground to abandon the mind's power of discovering truth, and we shall be obliged to drop into skepticism, or at least agnosticism. The conscience grows as all living things do, but it grows from a germ. The faculties of the mind, like the properties of body, are all of the nature of tendencies. Sense perception, for example, is such a tendency. It does not act till it is called forth, and it is called forth when material objects are presented it. It is much the same with other mental capacities. The fancy is a seed, but does not bud and blossom and bear its rich fruit unless it has knowledge and experience as its material and its nutriment. there are intellectual capacities in infants and in savages, but they need to be called forth and ripened by light and by heat directed towards them. It is the same with the moral power. It is in all men native and necessary, but it is a norm requiring to be evolved. It grows as the oak grows, as the tree needs earth in which to root itself and air of which to breathe, so the conscience needs a seat in our mental nature, with a stimulus to make it germinate and expand. All along, it is so far swayed by its surroundings. Its health will depend on the climate. When reared in a bare soil, it will be dwarfish. When exposed to cold and blighting, it will be stunted and gnarled. In a good soil and a healthy atmosphere, it will be upright and well formed. In particular, it grows and spreads out with the intelligence which enables it clearly to apprehend facts and to discover the consequences. All this may be admitted, while we hold that the moral power could not have been produced without a native moral norm any more than a plant or animal could have been produced without a germ. From this account, it appears that the conscience is liable to be deceived and led astray. In particular, it may be swayed by the desires and wishes of the heart. In short, by the will. It is, as Butler so often calls it, a faculty of reflection, and does not perceive objects directly, as the external senses and the consciousness do. It is dependent so far on the representation given to it. If that be perverted, the judgment of conscience, right enough in regard to the representation, may be wrong as to the thing itself. On the supposition that the white thing we see in the wood is a ghost, we might very properly be alarmed, but we have no fear when we discover it to be a white sheet. If that idol is a god, as the man's ancestors told him, he does right to worship it. But as the Christian knows it is no god, he feels under no obligation to pay it any reverence. If this farm is mine, as the Irish peasant argues, I am justified in resisting all attempts to drive me from it. He sees this to be wrong only when he is convinced that the property belongs to his landlord. Parents made their children to pass through the fire to Moloch, because they thought it would pacify the god. A friend of mine was under the delusion that God required him to sacrifice the object that was dearest to him, and was about to proceed in consequence to put his wife to death. He had a correct enough moral perception, but was under the away of a deranged misunderstanding. Saul thought he ought to crush the rising Christian sect because he regarded them as apostates, and he changed his conduct when he saw that they were following the true faith. The Hindu casts his female child into the Ganges, and the African exposes his mother to perish by a fountain, as being convinced that it is better they should thus die than be exposed to a life of hunger and privation. The Jesuit reckons himself justified in deceiving the enemies of the Church, because of the great good which may thereby be accomplished. But with all its defects and mistakes, the conscience is indestructible, quite as much so as the understanding is. In children and in savages, it has to occupy itself with very insignificant objects, but still it is seen working, and it is capable of being developed by an increase of intelligence. Criminals have resisted it, and so blunted it, but at times it will deal its blows upon them with tremendous force. Deceived and silent as to certain deeds of wickedness, it will show itself alive and awake as to others. We have cases of robbers committing murder with little or no compunction, but greatly distressed by the neglect to perform certain superstitious rites which they regard as binding on them. On the other hand, there are men very honest in their transactions with one another, but who do not seem to be humbled or distressed by the neglect of the duties which they owe to God. It seems to me that conscience is of the very nature, personality, and identity of the soul. Deprive anyone of his power of discerning good and evil, of distinguishing between cruelty and benevolence, candour and deceit, purity and impurity, and you have so far stripped him of his humanity quite as much as if you had shorn him of the power of distinguishing between truth and error. The question arises, what is the moral norm which, seated down in the depth of our nature, never changes? It may be difficult to express this accurately, owing to the mixing up of other things with our moral judgments and sentiments. But we perceive that there are certain acts which call the moral discernment into exercise. Thus we approve of disinterested love, and regard the affection of a mother for her boy as a virtue. But there are cases in which the mother shows her love to her son in ways which we disapprove, as when she indulges him in what is injurious, or shows an unjust preference of him over other boys. This shows that in moral good there is not only love but a law-regulating love. Love ruled by law thus seems to be the quality in intelligent beings commended by the conscience. And the opposite of this, a lawless love or selfishness or hatred, seems to be sin, which is a transgression of the law. End of section 27.
Section 28 of Psychology, The Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Maddi Shinner. Psychology, The Motive Powers by James McCosh. Section, The Will or Optative Power. Chapter 1. The Essential Nature of Will. It is self-evident that there is such a power. We are conscious of it. In fact, we know it. We feel it working. It is different from all the other faculties of the mind. It has a power in itself. A tempting proposal is made to us. We may obtain a large fortune by telling a lie. Prior to any exercise of will in such a case, other powers must operate. We have to understand what is proposed. The wealth has spread out its allurements to the appetences, and the conscience may have declared that there is deceit and that it is evil. But we have now to decide whether we are or are not to tell the falsehood. We decide to follow the path of integrity, and we reject the proposal. There is now more than the understanding and the love of money and conscience. With all these we might, in our free will, have told the lie and got the possession. We might have accepted, but we have chosen to reject, and in doing so, we have exercised will. Let us ascertain what is involved. The essential element is choice. 2 courses are open to us, and we choose one rather than the other. But it is not necessary that there should be 2 courses or 2 objects. One only may be before us, and we adopt it. In all such cases, occurring every hour of our waking existence, there is an act of a peculiar kind, different in toto, as the consciousness testifies, from the action of matter different from the exercises of understanding, of the conscience or the emotions. As will takes the form of adoption, so it may also manifest itself in rejection. We scorn the proposal to tell a falsehood. Indeed, in all cases in which there are 2 or more ways before us, we exercise both choice and rejection. In choosing the one, we virtually set aside the other, at least in comparison with the one preferred. It is of special moment to distinguish the will from other principles of man's nature, particularly from the emotion with which it is often combined and with which it is apt to be confounded. We have shown that in all emotion there is excitement, with attachment or repugnance. We look with complacency or displacency on the object of which we have an idea. But in will there is something more decisive. We accept the object or event, or we put it away from us. When we see a fine picture, we cannot but admire it. This is emotion. But we convey it, knowing it to belong to another, and we would appropriate it except for fear of exposure. Then we have a wish regarding it, and it is evil. Ethical writers, in order to save morality, have found it necessary to draw distinctions of some sort in regard to the will. They often distinguish between desire and volition, declaring that there is nothing good or evil in desire, while there may be in volition. A man, they say, may not be responsible for his desires, which may often be independent of his will, or even contrary to it. He may be said to be praiseworthy or blameworthy when his desires come forth in acts. Now, without affirming that there is no such distinction, or that it is unimportant, I do not regard it as the essential one in the matter of human responsibility. Good and evil do not consist primarily in outward deeds. They lie in the heart, or will. There may be evil in all forms of covetousness, and envy and malice, even when they do not come forth into corresponding acts. Quote, "Whoso looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." End quote. Our moral nature approves of this maxim. The correct ethical statement is, wherever choice enters, responsibility may be involved. End of section 28.
Section 29 of Psychology, The Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, The Motive Powers by James McCosh. The will, or optative power, various forms of voluntary acts. From an early date, distinctions of some kind were drawn as to the operations of the will. Thus Aristotle distinguishes, though not very clearly, between voulesis, choice of ends, voule, choice of means, proeresis, deliberate preference of things in our power. The will appears at first as weak and infantile. It grows with the growth of mind, and specially of the intelligence and character. It is first, in a sense, instinctive. It may rise into attention, desire, wish, into volition, deliberate preference or rejection, obstinacy. It may be the mere passive wish that makes no effort. It may be the mere moving of the arm to ward off a pressing danger. It may become a purpose to gain far distant ends, to remove evil, to avoid temptation, to bear up in the midst of trouble, to contend with sin within and corruption around us. It may be settled into what is called a strong will, continued for years in the midst of obstacles, opposition and suffering, and in the end succeeding or making shipwreck. 1. Instinctive or spontaneous will, so called for want of a more explicit phrase. It is entitled to be regarded as will, for there is a succession of volitions, which, however, are so spontaneous in their nature that they can scarcely be said to have anything voluntary in them. There is certainly no thoughtful or deliberate choice. The most important element is an instinctive one, stirring up an impulse which prompts to a momentary voluntary act. It is thus the infant soon learns to cast off by its hand a fly or some other offensive object, or to seize an object with a pleasing color. It is thus we hasten to ward off a blow, to prevent a fall. There is momentary will in every step we take in walking, otherwise our feet would not carry us to the point towards which we would wish to go. Our habitual acts come soon to be of the same nature as our instinctive ones. It is probable, indeed, that a large portion of our instinctive actions are the result of a continued excess or habit, and are raising up a series of immoral acts of will. I believe that vastly more than half our movements are thus impulsively voluntary, half instinctive, and half unintentional. 2. Desire. This is not necessarily voluntary. It may be a mere inclination for food, for rest, or for action, to avoid pain or to catch pleasure. All our natural dispositions tend to raise up desires without any necessary interference of the will. Such are the desire for society, for esteem, for fame, for power. These all instigate to action, which needs will to execute it, and then certainly the process becomes voluntary. Desire and volition thus join in our mind every waking hour of our existence. In these instinctive acts, involuntary or voluntary, there is nothing either morally good or evil. They become reprehensible only when we do not keep them in due order, when we allow them to run to excess or lead us into forbidden courses. When we direct them aright, when they are made to accomplish good ends, they become virtuous and commendable, and our desires may become holy and elevating. 3. Attention, which is an act of the will. Here the mind is directed to certain objects before it, and as long as it fixes itself upon them, it detains them. These objects may be presented by any of the mental powers, by the senses, the memory, the reason, or any combination. Such fixed contemplation is necessary to our being able to form a clear and correct apprehension of any vast or complicated subject. When a number and variety of objects come before the mind simultaneously or in succession, they appear dim and scattered. When the eye is opened, it must in ordinary circumstances take in a number of them with their varied forms, colors, and distances. But our apprehension of each of them is vague and confused. It is the same with the crowd of thoughts which troop into our minds when we consider some general subject. It is as when we are introduced to a large company. It is only as we single out one after another of the individuals that our idea of the whole and of the parts becomes discriminating. When the attention is directed to any one object, it stands out distinctly from the others, and then, by the laws of association, a whole host of related objects gather around it, and we come the better to know its nature. Sir Isaac Newton has declared that if in any point he excelled others, it was because he gave his attention exclusively to the topic he was studying. We have a similar testimony from Thomas Reid, who represents the Scotch school. Dr. Chalmers was fond of representing attention as combining the intellectual and the moral. By fixing the mind, we can make the intellectual moral, and by neglecting to do so, we may make it immoral. 4. Rejection. What is presented is repelled. Sometimes this repulsion is altogether instinctive. It is merely turning away from a repulsive object, say in taste, or smell, or when we change our position to avoid pain or drive away an annoyance. But it may become a very strong determination to oppose what is evil. It may have to resist the attractions of pleasure, the assaults of temptation, the tempests of passion, and desperate opposition. In this nature of ours, with its perverse tendencies, and in this world of ours so full of evil, the resistance needed may require to be very determined and very prolonged. To be able to say no to plausible proposals is an essential power in all lofty character. A power of resistance may give great strength to the character, though if it is not judiciously guided, it may become mere obstinacy. I read the imprecations of the Psalms as an expression of indignation against wickedness, which is an element in all holy character. 5. Wish. It is of moment to distinguish between our mere instinctive appetences, desires, and aversions on the one hand, and our acts of choice on the other hand. Wish is always an act of the will. By it we may select a thing, or at least choose out a thing, or we put it away from us. This may become a very powerful sentiment. We may muse upon an object, we may long for it, we may clasp it and cherish it. The aspirations of the heart may be among the grandest and most inspiring of our affections, elevating the soul from earth to heaven. Such breathings have made the Psalms so universally read by devout people. The soul longeth, even fainteth, to behold the beauty of the Lord. 6. Preference. This is the apeiresis of Aristotle, regarded by him as an essential element in virtue. This makes all virtue voluntary, a doctrine which is true only when we make it embrace a wish as well as positive decisions of the mind. In this higher form of will, we come to a positive and decided determination. We elect an object or a course of conduct, and in doing so we have commonly to choose among a number of competing ways, spreading out their allurements before us. Such an act decides the whole conduct for good or evil, and has commonly long influence, leading us promptly and peremptorily to stop our ears to the voice of the siren alluring us to evil, and it may be forming in the end the whole character, making it firm and stable. All such wishes and preferences are within the heart, but they come forth into action, in which case we have 7. Volition. This is will in action. Towards this point all its acts tend, and this is its consummation. The child sees a flower with a bright color and seizes it. The man perceives a more substantial object as he regards it. His eye is attracted by gold, capable of bringing so many enjoyments, and he proceeds to earn it, only it may be to find its pleasure as evanescent as the petals of the flower. This is simply a higher exercise of the same will power, exercised from day to day under, it may be strong native or acquired impulses. It produces the man of strong character. 8. A strong will. This is a somewhat loose but expressive phrase, denoting a disposition rather than an individual act. It is a continued resolution and determination prompted by a dominant passion, such as the love of glory or of power. It manifests itself in resistance to everything that opposes the man's favorite projects. It would bear down all obstacles that may come in its way. It is the special organ of destructiveness in ambitious men. It is as often found in weaker woman as in stronger man, leading her to devise innumerable means to accomplish her ends, to gain a lover or to thwart a husband. It incites the youth to reach the greatest height in scholarship or in civil and military pursuits. As he climbs the mountain, he may have to mount rocks and cross ravines, but he will not stay till he reaches the summit to obtain the commanding view, or it may be to find himself in mist and cloud. A promontory, which for 1,000 years has defied wind and waves, is a symbol of such a character. End of section 29.
Section 30 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tim Rowe. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The will associating itself with other mental acts. The will may be associated with every other mental faculty, and wherever it goes, it may carry good or evil and consequent responsibility. The senses may be influenced by it. It is well known that there are inferences of the understanding mingling with many of our perceptions of external objects. In our mature life, we feel as if we instinctively know the distances of objects as certainly as their shape and colour. But it has been generally admitted ever since the days of Berkeley that the measurement of distance by the eye is an acquired and not an original endowment. It has been ascertained that the knowledge of distance by the ear is also an acquisition of experience. But in most cases there is need of more or less attention in order to the mind adding the acquired to its instinctive knowledge. Indeed, physiological research shows that there is need of a concurrence of the will in most of the healthy exercises of the senses. Without attention, the whole impression on the mind is like the shadow of a passing cloud upon a lake, not ruffling the surface at the time and speedily passing away. The objects before the eye in the room in which we are accustomed to sit, to work or to study, must in a sense be perceived by the eye, as must by the ear the ticking and striking of the clock, and the beating of the wind upon the window. But how dim and fleeting is the whole scene, unless there be something to fix the mind upon the object. In sight, there is need of a setting of the eye in order to distinct vision, and this is to some extent dependent on the will. Everyone knows that in the use of the stereoscope the two images may not be blended into a solid till the mind has taken in the figure. The facile use and improvement of the senses depends to a large extent upon the attention to the objects. The sportsman will notice a hare or a wildfowl where the unpractised eye sees only the bare ground with its herbage. The Indian will place his ear on the ground and discover signs of the approach of a hostile band many miles away, when the ordinary ear can hear no sounds whatever. In this way we account for the finer perception of the other senses when the person has been deprived of one of his senses. As the result of practice, the blind man has commonly a much more acute and accurate touch than others. There are authenticated cases of his being able to discern differences of colour by the touch, either by certain roughnesses on the surface, or by the actinic or heat action of different colours. We ascend a height and look abroad on an extended scene in a loose and dreamy mood of mind. How vague and imperfect is our apprehension of the whole! It is not till the attention is fixed on one part after another that the hills rise up to their proper height, and the plains extend into their full sweep, and the sea is distinguished from the land, and the cattle dot over the field, and the grain waves in luxuriance, and the wood shows its deep shade, and the village appears so cheerful, and the old tower looks as if it was set to guard the whole. Of a like nature is the influence of attention. On every perception it lends distinctness to the dim, individuality to the general, and brings into clear light and exposes to the view what would otherwise have lain in the shadow of obscurity. Self-consciousness is equally swayed by attention. I believe that consciousness is a concomitant of all our intelligent acts, of our ideas, our feelings, our resolutions. But as our thoughts and emotions flow on, we commonly pay little attention to them. Indeed, we are commonly so interested in the objects we think about that we pay little or no regard to what we think about them. In fact, it is because we are so concerned about the objects that the current of ideas flows on. But we can detain any state of mind and ascertain its nature, can determine whether it is a thought, a fancy, or a feeling. Consciousness, when thus exercised, may be called reflection, in which the mind bends back and looks in upon itself and its actings. In detaining the thought, it detains all that is associated with the thought, such as remembrances, judgments, imaginations, joys and sorrows, hopes and fears, elevations and humiliations, bright prospects and dark, which pursue each other like shadows and sunshine on the mountainside. The widow has her grief ever renewed and her sadness given to the countenance by her husband being called upon and dwelt upon. The Christian has his character moulded by looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of his faith, and beholding his glory as in a glass is changed into the same image. The reproductive powers are very much swayed by the will. Thus the mind has a power of retention. This is very largely determined by the amount of energy we have bestowed on the thought. We seem to be conscious at the moment of everything that passes through the mind while it passes, but then it is apt to pass away forever, unless it is stamped, as it were, on the soul by the force exerted upon it, more particularly by a resolution to detain it, in order to examine it and to think about it, We can thus fix what we choose in the mind in order to its being recalled when it pleases us, or possibly when it may be very inconvenient. For alas, we may retain in this way that which is to trouble us, and which will insist on intruding in spite of our efforts to tempt or to torment us. By cherishing vain, proud, lustful, or malignant feelings, which should be instantly banished, we may be forming a corresponding character to abide with us through life. The wayward feelings and the prejudices which now carry us along at their pleasure are the result of a long train of voluntary associations, which we have hugged and fondled, till now they refuse to depart when we command them. On the other hand, it is possible to lay up in this way a number of pleasant and profitable memories, which may ever be adding to our happiness and prompting us to what is good, and so help to train and discipline the mind and make the present determine the future. The association of ideas is to a large extent dependent on the energy bestowed on an idea, which energy commonly takes the form of attention. There are laws of association, which are called secondary by Thomas Brown, laws of preference by Hamilton. These determine, among a number of ideas, which might come up according to the primary laws of contiguity and correlation, which shall come up at any given time. We have seen and conversed with, at one and the same time, 4 people in one room. Next time I enter the room, I think of one of them, but not of the others. The reason is, I had a long talk with him and became interested in him, and now he and the conversation come up afresh. Now the main secondary law is that those ideas come up most frequently on which we have bestowed the largest amount of force of mind, and this may be intellect, feeling, or will. Thus, if we wish to give strength to an idea, we may secure this by thinking about it and showing attention to it, and inviting it to visit us once and again. Such an idea will become the centre of a cluster gathered around it, and as it comes up, will bring its companions with it. Each member will be associated with other thoughts or feelings with which it has been conjoined, or with which it has some correlation, and thus we can command a vast field of thought. It is thus that, when our mind is so trained, we can, on sitting down to compose a paper, ensure a great flow of observations, illustrations, arguments, all tending towards the point which we wish to reach. Thus the orator can command a long train of thoughts, phrases, fancies, flatteries, warnings, denunciations, all tending to persuade his audience to take a particular step. Memory is powerfully swayed by the will from the causes already mentioned. Every student of philosophy knows the distinction, as drawn by Aristotle, between mnesis and anamnesis, which may be translated memory on the one hand and reminiscence or recollection on the other. It consists essentially in this, that in the one there is only the spontaneous flow of the laws of association left to themselves, whereas in the other there is the interposition of the will. We seek out, we hunt for, to use an expression of Aristotle's, what we know that we want. In both there is only, after all, the operations of the laws of association, but in the one we allow the train to carry us whither it will, whereas in the other we detain present thought, and turn it round and round till it brings up that which we're in search of, or drives away the unpleasant or evil thought which we would banish. By being constantly stimulated, guided and retrained, the thoughts will become controlled and regulated, receiving what is profitable and rejecting what is deleterious. The imagination, like the trained horse, may be made to carry us fleetly to the point we would reach, and yet be thoroughly under control. Dougal Stewart accounts for the vagaries, the extravagances, the inconsistencies of our dreams by supposing that in them the stream of thought flows on uncontrolled, whereas we always restrain the wanderings of the fancy and our waking moments. Whatever may be thought of this theory, which I believe contains a truth, but not the whole truth, it is certain that we can control the imagination as we govern the horse by whip and spur and bridle. Our imaginations, like other mental operations, are very much determined by the force which has been thrown into the original ideas from which they are drawn. The painter, by fondly dwelling on natural scenes or on striking historical incidents, can fill his mind with images which will come up of their own accord, and then he can shape them into the forms which he wishes them to take. The comparing, judging, and reasoning power. It is proverbial that the heart sways the head, that the wish is father of the thought. This means that the will, with its volitions and its wishes, is apt to sway the intellect in its judgments and in its reasonings, which I may remark are just judgments in which we compare two terms by means of a third. It is not difficult to account for this by the laws whose operations we have been tracing. In all judgment there is comparison of objects, two or more, of objects apprehended, of objects represented. Now the apprehension may be a misapprehension, the representation a misrepresentation, and the judgment pronounced will in consequence be a perverted one. It is at this point that the will interposes for good or for evil. It may bring the objects before the mind as they are, and present them in a clear light, and the judgment pronounced will in consequence be a sound one, or, acting as an interested or passionate partisan, it exhibits an imperfect, a partial, an exaggerated or distorted case to the judge, who pronounces a wrong sentence. This I believe to be the main cause of the errors into which we fall. They spring not from the wrong judgments of the understanding, but from the prejudices of the heart, presenting things not as they are in themselves, but as we would like them to appear. Vague resemblances, carelessly observed, are regarded as identities. Inadequate analyses, imperfect estimates, specious analogies, and plausible hypothetical causes are suggested and mislead the judgment. On the other hand, a candid disposition and a truth-loving spirit are the best securities for reaching the truth in all matters, speculative and practical. Without these, the intellect will always be more or less blinded, inconsistent in its decisions and crooked in its walks. With these, it will sooner or later attain certainty and assurance in all matters, bearing on our faith and our creed for this life and the life to come. The conscience of all the mental powers is the one most likely to be swayed by the moral rudder. The rationale of this can be given. The conscience is a joint faculty, and in one of its potencies is a reflex power. Bishop Butler, bringing his moral theory into congruity with Locke's intellectual theory, called it a faculty of reflection. It originates nothing, starts nothing, but simply looks in upon and judges what is presented. But the deed may be presented in too favourable a light, or an injuriously unfavourable light, probably under a flattering aspect so far as our own acts are concerned, and possibly under a depreciatory light as respects the deeds of others. It is thus we are to account for those perversions of conscience which have so puzzled ethical writers. They are to be ascribed not so much to the conscience as an arbiter as to the wishes of the heart, which is bent on what gratifies selfishness or strong passion, and for this purpose furnishes false pictures. Very often the action of which we have to judge is a complex one, with intricate relations, and only those favouring a certain end are brought into view. A good line of action which we are not willing to perform is represented as leading to inconveniences, and we turn away from it. An evil course of conduct which we are bent on following is seen as leading to pleasure, and the moral monitor utters no admonition. Doubts may arise as to the soundness of our moral condition, but these, being humbling and painful, are driven away with all convenient speed. Hence the difficulty of getting a favourite sin condemned. Charge it at any one time or point, and it instantly takes the name and credit of some virtue to which it bears a partial resemblance. Cowardice says it is prudence. Cunning claims to be wisdom. Lust calls itself love. From the general cause now referred to have proceeded, if I do not mistake, those irregularities and apparent inconsistencies in the decisions of conscience which so puzzled and confounded ethical and metaphysical inquirers. The approval of deceit, when successful among the ancient Spartans, of the widow burning herself at the funeral pile of her husband in India, of the murder of female children in the South Sea Islands, and of the exposure of the aged to starvation in some parts of Africa, all originate in false views of the heroism of the youth, who succeeds in compassing a difficult end, of the devotedness of the widow who declines living after her husband has died, of the helplessness of children and the old when there is no provision for their sustenance. The emotions. The analysis of the emotions in this treatise shows how the will sways the feelings. At the basis of all emotion there is an idea of something appetible, of something to be desired or avoided. Now, by means of this idea, we can so far command our feelings. We can detain the idea that gratifies us, say by elevating us or by flattering our vanity. By calling up something else, we can banish what runs counter to our inclination or lowers us in our own esteem. In one sense, feeling is not under our command. It will flow out when it pleases and as it pleases. There are times when we feel our hearts to be cold as ice and hard as a rock, when we should expect and wish them to be full of life and love. Again, there are seasons when our emotions flow out in torrents, when we make the utmost effort to restrain them, but still we can indirectly guide and directly suit ourselves to it. We may not be able to command compassion to flow at every time, or indeed at any time, but we can enter the house of mourning and visit the widow and fatherless in their affliction, and our hearts, if hearts we have, will be moved and melted. We may be angry and think we do right to be angry with someone we think has acted an unworthy part towards us, but when we find him in deep trouble, our heart relents, and we hasten to his rescue. End of section 30.
Section 31 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Stacey M. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The will or optative power. The will as exercised in the moral virtues. Socrates did not give the will a place in virtue, which he delighted to define as an act of wisdom, foreseeing consequences. He represented vice as folly, and a favorite maxim with him was ovo elis ikav kakos. Some think that vice enters as an element into the more complex account of virtue by Plato, but will, poiopeos, was first formally introduced into the definition of virtue by Aristotle. It is acknowledged by all our higher ethical writers that in order to constitute a deed virtuous, there must be more in it than merely a becoming outward act. In order to make an act truly good, the motive must be good. The payment of a debt is not regarded as a virtuous act if it is done through mere selfishness or a fear of punishment. Courage, the old Roman virtus, is a good act when employed in defending what is recognized as a just cause or to repel what is evil. We value a kind act when we feel that it proceeds from kindness and not from hypocrisy. A just deed is commended when it is done because it is just. Temperance, that is the government of the lusts and passions, is a virtue when it is cultivated in order to avoid the evils of ungoverned licentiousness. Aristotle is right in giving voluntary preference an important place in all these cardinal virtues of the Greeks and Romans. End of section 31.
Section 32 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tim Rowe. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The will, or optative will. Will in the Christian graces. If there be will in the heathen virtues, much more must there be so in the Christian graces. As the mind is capable of them, psychology should unfold them to the view, and this, whether they be religious or irreligious. Faith is opposed to sense. It is always in something not now before us, in something unseen. It may consist in the mere assent of the mind to a proposition, as when we believe that gravitation is a property of matter, or that the sun will rise tomorrow. Here there may be no exercise of will, but there are faiths in which there is an exercise of wish or will. Faith is the phrase employed to designate the mind's acceptance of religious truth. In the Christian religion, faith is the grace by which we receive Christ and rest upon him. Even in religion, there may be a faith which is merely speculative, as it is often called, to distinguish it from a living or a heart faith. Theologians have not always succeeded in drawing the distinction between this and a living faith. The difference, as it appears to me, consists essentially in the one being an assent of the understanding, whereas the other contains an additional act of will, a concurrence of the will. True religious faith is therefore the consent of the will to the assent of the intellect. It is always of the nature of trust or confidence. The phrases apply to it in the Old Testament Scriptures. With the Christian, it is faith or trust in the revelation which God has been pleased to make of His will in His work, but more fully in His Word. It is specially faith in Jesus Christ as set forth in the Word. This faith carries with it the power of the understanding and the will, both of the head and of the heart. As being an act of the will joined on to judgment, it carries with it a practical power. Such faith must always lead to works, and if the faith is pure, to good works. It worketh and worketh by love. Repentance. Here there is an exercise of conscience. There is a sense of sin. We condemn certain affectations which we have cherished and acts that we have performed, and we grieve over these. But there is vastly more in penitence than regrets. The essence of it is what the New Testament calls metanoia, a change of mind or intent. Hitherto we have been walking in one way, and now we turn and walk in another way. And in all this there is choice and a decision, a purpose of new obedience. The same is true of all the other graces. In Christian hope, we look for things that we have chosen as being good. In patience, we submit to what God has been pleased to lay upon us. We acknowledge it to be good, and we fall in with it. In humility, in poverty of spirit, we accept the lovely view which we have been led to take of ourselves when we compare our character and conduct with the law of God. In meekness, we accord with the account of ourselves which God has given in His Word, and submit to the will and the dispensations of God. End of section 32.
Section 33 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information on to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The will, or optative power. The will as an element in love. I have referred to love in treating of emotion, but there is more in love considered as a grace than mere feeling. Love manifests itself in two forms. The love of complacency. We delight in the object or person beloved. It is thus that the mother clasps her infant to her bosom, thus that the sister interests herself in every movement of her little brother, thus that the young man seeks the society of his companions, and is grieved when he is separated from them, thus that the father, saying little but feeling much, follows the career of his son as he contends in the rivalries of the world, thus that throughout our lives our hearts, if hearts we have, cling round the tried friends of our youth. Thus that the wife would leave this world with her last look on her husband. Thus that the father would depart with his sons and his daughters around his couch. There is a last look which love remembers. That given, for instance, when the ship moves away from the dear friend on it, and when the soul leaves the earth to wing its way to heaven. Love looks out for the person's beloved. The mother speedily discovers her son in that crowd. The blacksmith hears his daughter's voice singing in the village choir. The love of benevolence. This is a higher form of love. In this, we not only delight in the contemplation and society of the persons beloved, we wish well to them, we wish them all that is good. Therefore, all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. We will oblige them, if we can. We will serve them, if in our power. We watch for opportunities of promoting their welfare. We are ready to make sacrifices for their good. This love is ready to flow forth towards relatives and friends, towards neighbors and companions, towards all with whom we come in contact. It will go out towards the whole family of mankind. We are ready to increase their happiness, and in the highest exercises of the affection, to raise them in the scale of being, and to exalt them morally and spiritually. Now, this second is the higher aspect of love. The other belongs, in man, to a lower department of his nature. It is an exercise merely of emotional clinging, and may contain nothing virtuous or holy. It may be merely like the attachment of a dog to its master. The love of benevolence is of a higher kind. We wish to do good, we strive to do good to those whom we love. The one is like a genial heat in a closed compartment. The other is like an open fire, radiating heat on all around. The one is like a lake reflecting heaven on its bosom. The other is a fountain welling up and carrying out with it a refreshing influence. It flows out in a great number and variety of forms, in compassion, in pity, in tenderness, in long-suffering and patience. Charity suffereth long, and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. But it may be asked, how can this benevolence be exhibited by us towards God, who is independent of us and needs not our aid? The answer is, we identify ourselves with Him and strive to promote His glory and the causes in which He is interested. We make it our prayer, Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. These two forms of love, while they may be distinguished, should never be separated. But in fact, they have often been divorced, the one from the other. How often do men show the love of complacency without the love of benevolence? They delight in the society of, and they receive gratification from persons whom they do not seek to benefit. They do worse. They injure those to whom they are attached, as the ivy is apt to destroy the tree which it embraces and adorns. They do so by indulging, by flattering, by tempting them. The doting mother spoils the child whom she so fondles. The seducer ruins the unhappy one whom he clasps in his foul embrace. There is a love that is not lovely. It is, in fact, a refined form of selfishness. In our gratification, we lay hold of and hug to our bosoms objects which we only corrupt. I apprehend that much of human sinfulness consists in tearing asunder what should be kept united, in selfishly turning persons to our uses only to tempt and destroy them. It has often been observed that the worst things are the perversion of good things. Abused intellectual gifts make the dangerous villain. Abused sensibilities make the accomplished tempter. Abused affections gender the keenest of all miseries. End of section 33.
Section 34 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tim Rowe. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The Will or Optative Power. The influence of the will on character. The character of man depends on three different circumstances: on heredity, on surroundings, and on his will. Everyone starts with certain mental tendencies. This used to be called his nature, which it certainly is. It is now traced to heredity as its cause. It has come down through the father and mother from an ancestry. It is apt to appear in early childhood, and it runs on to old age. In many cases, this inherited character is very marked. We discover that the person belongs to a certain race or a certain family, not only by his features, but still more clearly by his mental qualities, by his prodigality or his penuriousness, by his courage or by his cunning, too. Most men are liable to be swayed by the circumstances in which they are placed. There are some who act merely as others act. Others have their shape given them, like pebbles on the shore, by the rough seas in which they have been rolled. But is every man's whole character determined solely by such agencies? 3. Man has a will lying beneath and behind all these, ready to act at any time and to counteract and control them, even as the igneous matter in the bowels of the earth is consolidated, upturned, or lowered the orderly strata, and given their forms to our hills and vales, to our continents and islands. The will should restrain the impulses which are inconvenient, which degrade their possessors and lead them into trouble and into sin. It may and should enter into a holy war with these and check every actual appearance of them. This is the temperantia to which the Greeks and Romans attached so much importance, the restraining of the lusts and evil passions and subjecting them to law. By watching and resisting these evil propensities, they may not be eradicated, but they will be regulated. Instead of being masters, they will become servants, allowed to act only by permission of their superior. But these restraints will produce only a negative character, hard as the case of a shellfish. They may also cherish all that is good within, and getting good from without, especially from above, may seek out fields for the employment of the faculties and affections, and devote them to benevolent ends. I hold that in this way a man may form his own character, morally, with intents and ends and practical working. I believe that everyone who sets himself earnestly to accomplish this may to a great extent succeed. True, there will be occasional failures when he forgets to be watchful, but the wise man will thereby come to know himself better, and be ready to avoid temptations, and lay on restraints at the proper time. All this is perfectly consistent with family peculiarities, the influence of outward circumstances being allowed to remain. One does not like to see every man aiming to be the same as every other, or indeed as any other man. We are pleased to see tribal and household traits, to see a Frenchman act like a Frenchman, and a Scotsman as a Scotsman, and an American as an American, and to notice the effects of a man's training and of the positions, favourable or difficult, in which he has been placed, just as we like to see the healthy youth full of life, and the soldier not concealing the scars of the wounds he has received in battle. An outburst of nature always warms our hearts towards the individual from whom it comes, but let the whole be subordinated to the control of a will guided by principle. These personalities break up the uniformity, like that of Chinese society, produced by sameness of position and by heredity. They introduce into society a new and a fresh life. We have now persons who act not necessarily as others do, but who strike out new paths. Taking their own way, they walk with all who are going in the same direction, but if the road strikes off, they will follow it, even though they should have to proceed alone. Such independent men furnish a wholesome element in society, like living streams flowing into the lake. They keep it from becoming a stagnant marsh. They supply pleasant heights, scattered over what would otherwise be wearisome plains. These free wills constitute the only spontaneous generation in our world. They introduce not only new varieties, but new species, which enter into the struggle for existence and prevail, constituting the progressive power and development, and tending to raise our world upward to a higher plane. End of section 34. Section 35 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tim Rowe. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The will or optative power. The will has freedom. Every faculty of the mind has its own peculiarities, and it is the business of those who would make themselves acquainted with it, not to judge of it by other powers, but to look at it as it is in itself and as it acts. The will in particular has properties which belong to no other mental operation. The actings of the other powers are undoubtedly regulated by the dominant law of cause and effect. But is it so with the exercises of the will? Are all our volitions the necessary result of antecedents without and within? I am very unwilling to throw myself into this conflict of the ages. I do not profess to be able to clear up every difficulty and to answer every objection, but I see certain truths to which I cling most resolutely. Firstly, there is a certain feeling, or rather conviction, attached to every voluntary act, but which is not attendant on the actings of any other powers. We express this by saying that we are free. We are free to go to the right side, or to go to the left in walking round a table. We are free to sit in the house or go outside. We are free to receive or refuse a visitor. We are free to accept a gift offered or to decline it. We are free to take a bribe or to reject it. We are free to tell the truth or to tell a lie. In all these cases I know that while I have taken the one course, I might have taken the other. It is not so with the exercise of the other powers. If a man is before me in clear day, I cannot be made to believe that he is not there. But we may, as we please, do him a kind or an unkind deed. We speak harshly to him, but we are conscious that we might have spoken pleasantly. If I receive £10 and again other £10, I know that I have received 20, and there is no choice left me, but I know also that I may spend this money in paying my debts or on sinful pleasures, and here there are purpose and preference. But is this choice of mine determined by causes acting above the will and independent of the will? I reply that there is no proof that it is so. It is often said that the will is always swayed by motives, in fact by the strongest motive, but the language is ambiguous. It may be a mere truism that what sways the will does sway the will, for by my motive is simply meant what sways the will. Or it may mean what is not proven, what I believe not to be true. By motive may be meant a power or powers out of the will acting independently of it. I hold that in all motive there is a concurrence, or rather a consent of the will. Till this is given, there can scarcely be said to be a motive. There is simply incentive or temptation. The man, it is said, was swayed by the love of money in doing a dishonest act, and it is affirmed that the love of money was the motive. But over many the love of money has no power, or no such power. Power is given to it as a motive by the will. By a long succession of acts, it may be creating an appetence, and above all, by a present act, clinging to the money. We must distinguish in the motive that which is independent of the will, and that which has the concurrence of the will. The former we are not responsible, always accepting so far as we may have produced it by previous voluntary acts. But many of our acts, no longer voluntary, are the result of acquired habits formed by the will. A man has for years cherished malignity towards one who has offended him, and on meeting him is tempted to inflict a blow which kills him. Now here there is causation not only in the blow, but in the temper from which it proceeded. But the temper has been caused by repeated acts of the will, and for all this the person is responsible first and last. The blow may be the consummation of the worst act, but the others were bad in themselves, and specially in this, that they led to the murder. The drunkenness, fallen into unexpectedly at the social party, is the visible sin, but it was the outcome of the tippling for months or years. He who sows the poisonous seed may be more criminal than he who eats the fruit. The appointment whereby objects act according to their nature is the deed of God. So far as man does not join in with it, he is not responsible, but so far as he consents and concurs, he makes the deed his own. Whoever else may be to blame for it, he is also to blame. The drinks are intoxicating according to a law of nature, but so far as he takes them, he is chargeable for them and the consequences. When he consents to an evil deed, when he opposes a good proposal, when he rejects a truth, he makes the deed his own, and is accountable for it, and cannot roll his own blame on another, even though that other be also to blame. So far all seems to me to be clear. Difficulties may be started as the consistency of God's causation with man's freedom, but the clearing of these perplexities lies in the higher metaphysics rather than with an inductive science whose office it is to unfold facts. End of section 35. Section 36 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Tim Rowe. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The will or optative power. The will, the seat of responsibility. By this I mean that man is responsible for his voluntary and his voluntary acts exclusively. For instance, there is nothing either virtuous or vicious in the exercise of mere intelligence. I speak of mere intelligence, for as we have seen, the voluntary power may associate itself with any one exercise of the intellectual powers for which, in that case, we are responsible. But speaking of understanding not exercised with will, but following the constitutional laws which God has planted in the mind, I cannot see that it is either virtuous or vicious. There is nothing morally commendable or the opposite in the operation of perception, of memory, or imagination, or the faculties which perceive resemblances, observe causes or other relations. That I see the trees bare in winter and covered with leaves in summer, that I remember today what I saw yesterday, that when I see a house burning I infer it must have been kindled. In all this there can be, nothing either of virtue or vice. This will, I think, will be acknowledged by all, but I am inclined to go a step farther, and to hold that moral good and evil do not lie, at least directly and immediately, in the possession or operation of conscience or the flow of instinctive feeling. I observed, when treating of the conscience, that it is upon voluntary acts that it pronounces its judgments, declaring that they are good or that they are evil. Virtue and vice do not consist in the possession of a conscience, but in that at which the conscience looks, and of which it approves or disapproves in a holy or unholy will. It may be doubted whether a person possessed of mere emotion could, in any circumstances, be regarded as responsible. It is when the element of will, the optative, the freedom of choice is working, that we declare man to be a responsible agent. But in making will the seat of responsibility, I give it a larger place than most philosophic and ethical writers do. I make its essence to be choice, or the opposite of choice, rejection, and I believe that there is this element not merely in volition, or the final determination to act, but in other steps which may never reach the length of outward acts. Under will I include not merely the volition or determination, but wishes, desires, and the opposite, voluntary aversions and antipathies. This gives the will a wide range, but not wider, I believe, than the place and consequent power which it has in the human constitution. Accountability is as wide as the will and embraces all tendencies to good or evil created by voluntary acts on our part. The drunkard is responsible not only for his individual acts of drinking, but for the habit which he has formed, and for all the iniquities of profanity, quarrelling, or licentiousness which he may commit in the state of intoxication. The prejudiced skeptic will have to render an account not only of his rejection of evidence, but that hardness and obstinacy which have been engendered, and which render him incapable of listening to truth with candour. In this way, responsibility, though applicable primarily to acts of will, may through them reach every part of man's nature and conduct. While wish and volition are both acts of will, they differ in their influence. Wish may reach over ourselves only, but volition may have an effect on many others, directly or indirectly, at this present time and forward into a prolonged future. It is said that in moving his finger a man starts a force which may take the round of the universe. It is certain that in performing a particular act, or in uttering a word good or bad, he may put in motion a moral potency which may reach over widely scattered nations and go down through many generations. Who can estimate the influence exercised over thought and character by the words uttered by such as Socrates, or by the greater than Socrates? Deeds have produced yet greater effects, such as the battles of patriots, the suffering of martyrs, and above all, the death which has been the life to so many. End of section 36.
Section 37 of Psychology, the Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Psychology, the Motive Powers by James McCosh. The Will or Optative Power. Ideas given by the Motive Powers. In Volume 1st, it has been shown how the different cognitive powers give us each a new idea. The senses give us extended space and resisting energy. Self-consciousness reveals self and personality. The two, the outer and inner senses, make known substance. The memory furnishes the idea of time. The imagination, in its widening power, genders such an idea of the infinite as the mind of man can hold. The comparative powers show us various relations, such as that of personal identity, of composition, of classes, of space and time, of proportion, activity, and causation. The motive powers also furnish us each with an idea. The conscience shows us moral good and evil, with their annexes, merit and demerit, sin, desert, reward, and penalties. The emotions disclose to us the lovely and the unlovely, with their colors, shades, hues, and tints, attractive and repulsive, especially the beautiful, the picturesque, the ludicrous, the sublime. The will, as it has freedom, so it imparts the idea of freedom in its various forms of wish, attention, rejection, preference, resolution, volition. The capacity to form such lofty ideas distinguishes mind from matter, man from the brute, and shows that man is fashioned after the likeness of God. All the rays of light shining on earth proceed from the fountain of lights in the heavens. End of section 37.
Section 38 of Psychology, The Motive Powers. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. Psychology, The Motive Powers by James McCosh. The Will or Optative Power. Conclusion. Man's Religious Tendencies. Man is commonly represented as a religious animal. Certainly he has some sort of religious instincts or inclinations. If this be so, and he exhibits them so universally, it is the business of psychology to expose them to the view and unfold their elements. It is clear to me that this characteristic of man is not a simple faculty, like the memory or the conscience. It is complexity with various composites, and varying with the elements involved. There are motives, there are capacities which prompt to religious ideas and feelings, often very crude, in all men. All the stronger capacities and cravings of our nature in seeking a foundation go down deeper than the crust of our earth. All the higher mount into a sphere above our earth and atmosphere. All the streams which we see flowing on are believed to rise in a fountain and go on to an ocean. We may have very obscure ideas as to where the fountain and what the ocean is. Causation about the deepest intellectual principle in our nature, and acting without cessation, goes out beyond the tangible and visible. The manifest effects, that is, new things or changes in old things, lead the mind to a cause which is seen itself to be an effect, leading on to a higher cause till we reach the uncaused. The law of cause and effect is not satisfied till it comes to this independent substance and calls in a God. The conscience, which is the most potent principle in our moral nature, imperatively says that we should do this and not do that, is a law in the heart, and points to a power above itself which we are required to obey. When we become aware that we have not obeyed it, we have a fear of one to condemn us, and it may be punish us. The order, the beauty, and beneficence of nature, made up of a number of scattered powers, point to one who has arranged them all. More powerful, there are events which look like interpositions of a higher power to favor or to frustrate us. There are times when men feel that God's thunders are rolling over their heads, and that his lightnings are ready to strike them, and they are prompted to fall down and cry, "O God, we thank thee. O God, deliver us." We cling to the belief that all does not die when the body dies, and that there may be a world waiting to receive us. Our love for our friends who loved us prompts us to think that the souls of our fathers and mothers, sisters and brothers, have not died with their bodies, and that they may still feel an interest in us, as we have certainly a service to perform towards them. This last circumstance seems to be regarded by Mr. Spencer as the main power in keeping alive the belief in another world. It is not the chief one, but affection makes it an influential one. So much on the one side. Man naturally believes in some sort of God and in a world to come. But it is equally true that he takes narrow, one-sided, perverted, often grotesque views on these subjects. Religion in the minds of the great body of mankind appears in the form of superstition. So instead of God making man, man makes God after his own image, with human passions, prejudices, and lusts, and he fashions his God as the heathen does his idol, of gold or silver, of wood or clay. The possession of the instincts of which we have been speaking does not make a man truly religious. He is made so by the use to which he turns them. The kind of God is determined by the inclinations to which he yields, and this goes down by heredity. With the African, he is a rain sender. With those who look exclusively to his power, he is a Baal, the fire god. With the lustful, the being worshipped is Venus, or Astarte. With the conscience-stricken, he speaks in the thunder and strikes with the lightning. Paul's account is the only theory that explains the whole facts, Romans 1:20 and 21. On the one hand, the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. On the other hand, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. The tendency is still the same. With certain physicists, he is a mere piece of mechanism. With some sentimentalists, he is mere feeling. With pantheists, he is the order of the universe. It is the office of pure religion, natural and revealed, to widen this narrowness and straighten this crookedness, and to clothe God with full perfections. God is spirit, God is light, God is love, and to combine these in one as the colors do in the sunbeam. End of section 38. End of Psychology, the Motive Powers, by James McCosh.